The air was thick with the scent of wet soil and the whisper of reeds swaying in the early morning breeze. It was the time of harvest, the season when every hand in the village found purpose in the rhythm of collecting rice, the grain that sustained them through the year. Across the broad valley, patches of green shimmered beneath a silver mist, and the faint outline of men and women moved slowly, bending and straightening in an ancient dance that had not changed for centuries. Their fields were carved along the edges of a slow-moving river, whose muddy banks gave life to the rice paddies. The work began before sunrise. The farmers walked barefoot, their feet sinking into the cool water, their garments tied high around their knees. Each carried a sickle, a curved iron blade fastened to a smooth wooden handle. The sickle's edge glimmered faintly in the first light of dawn. The harvest was never rushed. Every stalk of rice had to be handled with care. The farmers moved in rows, their sickles slicing cleanly through the stems. The sound crisp and deliberate, like a whisper of metal through grass. They tied the cut stalks into bundles using thin ropes made from dried reed fibers. The bundles were then laid in neat rows upon the dry ridges between the flooded paddies, where the morning sun would begin to draw out the moisture. Children ran between the fields, chasing frogs and carrying baskets of water for the workers. The older men shouted instructions, reminding everyone to keep the bundles straight, to lift them gently so as not to scatter the grains. The younger women worked in pairs, one cutting, one binding, moving in a rhythm that almost seemed like music, a soft chant rising from their lips as they labored from the edge of the field. The village elder watched the scene. His face was creased with the marks of many harvests, and his hands were dark and strong. He remembered how his father had done the same, and his father before him. To the people of this valley, rice was not merely food. It was a living bond between families, between the past and the future, between the earth and the sky. By mid-morning, the air shimmered with heat. The workers gathered beneath a rough canopy made from palm leaves. They shared a simple meal, boiled grains, pickled vegetables, and a thin broth flavored with herbs from the riverbank. No one spoke much while eating. The quiet was a form of respect. They believed that silence during harvest pleased the spirits of the fields, the invisible guardians who ensured the rice would grow again next year. After the meal, the work continued. The freshly cut stalks were carried to a flat area at the edge of the village, where large woven mats had been spread. There, the threshing began. The process was simple but demanding. The farmers beat the bundles against wooden planks or used a foot-operated flail, a long stick joined to a shorter one by leather straps. The motion was repetitive, rhythmic, and strangely beautiful. Golden grains scattered like rain as the stalks broke apart, falling onto the mats in soft showers of dust and husk. Women gathered the loose grains with wide bamboo trays, tossing them into the air to let the wind carry away the chaff. The heavier rice fell back into the trays, gleaming in the sunlight. It was a task that required patience and precision. Each toss, each catch was guided by years of practice. The sound of grain falling on bamboo mixed with the murmur of conversation, laughter, and the occasional cry of a child. By afternoon, the whole village had joined in. Even the elders helped, sitting on low stools and sorting the grains by hand. They sang as they worked, long, slow songs that told of floods and droughts, of love lost and found, of the endless cycle of planting and reaping. The melody drifted over the fields, echoing against the distant hills. When the sun began to sink, the sky turned the color of burning copper. The last of the rice was spread out to dry. Fires were lit nearby to keep away insects. The scent of smoke mingled with the sweetness of the drying grain. Women stirred the rice gently with long wooden paddles to ensure it dried evenly. That night, under the flickering light of oil lamps, the rice was stored in earthen granaries. These were tall structures raised above the ground on thick wooden stilts to protect the harvest from dampness and rats. The walls were made from layers of clay mixed with straw, hardened by fire and sun. The villagers believed that every granary had its own spirit, a silent protector that watched over the food through the long winter. Before the first sack of rice was poured in, the elders sprinkled a handful of ashes from the communal fire into the empty bin, murmuring a short prayer for abundance. Inside the granary, the air was warm and dry. The rice poured down like sand, filling the space with a soft, rustling sound. Each family marked its share by carving small symbols on wooden boards placed beside the bins. The granary would be sealed with mud and straw, and no one would open it again until the first snow melted and the next planting season arrived. Later, when the night deepened, the villagers gathered by the riverbank. The harvest festival had begun. Torches flickered in the dark, and the reflection of fire danced on the water. They beat drums made from hollowed wood and stretched hide, and the younger men danced, their feet striking the earth in perfect time. The women's voices rose in harmony, singing to the moon that hung above the valley like a silver coin. The elder stood again at the edge of the gathering, his eyes reflecting the firelight. He saw the young ones laughing, the old ones smiling, and he felt a deep sense of peace. For one more year, the earth had given them life. The cycle continued. As the night faded and the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the village fell silent once more. Smoke rose gently from the granaries, where the rice slept in its earthen chambers. The fields lay empty now, golden stubble glistening with dew. Soon they would be flooded again, the water returning to cradle the seeds of a new beginning. And somewhere, in the quiet rhythm of that life, in the bending of backs, the gleam of metal, the sound of grain falling, lived the essence of survival. The medieval people did not see rice as a crop alone. It was their language, their religion, their memory. Through it, they spoke to the land, and the land answered, year after year, harvest after harvest. Morning after the harvest festival began with a deep stillness. The mist hung low over the fields, soft and silvery, blurring the edges of everything. The celebration fires had long since burned out, leaving behind faint trails of smoke that curled upward into the pale sky. The villagers were slow to rise, their bodies heavy from days of labor and nights of music. But beneath that quiet calm, a new rhythm was already beginning, the rhythm of trade, storage, and survival. For in the medieval world, the harvest was never truly over when the last grain was stored. It was only the beginning of another, equally delicate process, the collection and distribution of the rice. Every grain was not just food, but also currency, debt, tax, and power. By mid-morning, a caravan of ox-drawn carts creaked into the village. The wooden wheels left deep grooves in the mud as they approached the granaries. Each cart was driven by men in coarse linen tunics, their faces weathered by travel and wind. They belonged to the lord's collectors, men sent from the estate of the local noble who owned the land. They came each year, after the festival, to claim the portion of rice owed as rent and tax, a ritual as old as the fields themselves. The villagers knew their rival well. It was not a moment of joy, but of acceptance. The elder gathered the men at the center of the square, beside the granary. A long wooden ledger, wrapped in cloth, was placed on a low table. Its pages were filled with inked marks and names, records of who owed what to whom, one by one. Families came forward. Each brought their share of rice in woven baskets, carried on shoulders or balanced on heads. The collectors measured the grain carefully, using a standard wooden box known as a due. The rice was poured in, leveled with a flat stick, and then emptied into the nobles' sacks. There was no bargaining, no protest. The villagers understood that without the Lord's protection, his soldiers, his irrigation works, his permission to farm, the fields would be nothing but flooded wasteland. As the rice was collected, the air filled with the dry hiss of grains against wood. Children watched from the edges of the crowd, their faces solemn. The collectors, efficient and wordless, sealed each sack with a mark burned into the fabric, the symbol of the noble house. Those sacks would soon travel by ox cart and river barge to distant towns, to feed soldiers, servants, and merchants. When the tax was complete, the collectors left a small portion of silver coins in exchange for the surplus rice. The villagers sold voluntarily. It wasn't much, just enough to buy salt, tools, or thread from the market town a few days' journey away. Yet the sight of silver still brought a glimmer of excitement. The coins bore the image of the reigning monarch, his face stern and idealized, surrounded by a wreath of rice stalks. To the villagers, it was a reminder that their labor reached all the way to the distant capital, a world they would never see. Later that day, after the collectors had gone, the villagers turned their attention to preservation. Not all the rice would stay in the granaries. Some would be parched, dried further in clay pots over slow fires to make it last through damp seasons. Women spread the grains in wide, shallow baskets and stirred them constantly, their hands moving in circular motion, the faint crackle of roasting filling the air. The scent was rich and nutty. Others began the process of milling. It was a laborious task done by foot-powered pestles, tall wooden beams that rose and fell rhythmically as workers stepped on the counterweights. The pounding sound echoed across the valley, dull, steady thuds like the heartbeat of the land. The husks broke away from the kernels, and the clean white grains were gathered, sifted, and stored again. In the evenings, small groups of traders arrived from neighboring villages. They carried woven sacks slung over their donkeys, offering spices, dried fish, and earthenware bowls in exchange for rice. The villagers gathered around them, examining each item with quiet curiosity. Trade was slow and deliberate, guided by custom rather than profit. No one cheated, for trust was as valuable as gold. At the far edge of the square, a young woman spread out her family's rice on a mat, her hands moving through the grains like water. A trader from the southern marshes knelt beside her, laying out small bundles of smoked eel and amber beads. Their conversation was soft but filled with meaning, a subtle exchange between sustenance and survival. When night fell, the traders and villagers shared a communal fire. They spoke of distant lands where the rice grew red instead of gold, of merchants who crossed the sea to carry it to strange kingdoms, where people ate with silver spoons. The villagers listened, eyes wide, as the world beyond their valley seemed to shimmer in the firelight. Meanwhile, in the noble's castle miles away, a different scene unfolded. The collected rice arrived in long processions of carts, unloaded by servants into stone storehouses. The Lord's steward counted each sack meticulously, noting how much had been gathered from each estate. Some of it would go to the kitchens, some to the soldiers, and some to the royal granaries as tribute. Nothing was wasted. Even the husks were used to feed livestock or fuel the furnaces that dried the grain. For the lords, rice was wealth and power. The more they controlled, the more soldiers they could pay, the more alliances they could forge. Beneath that system of exchange, the villagers' labor formed the invisible backbone of the realm. Their sweat became the foundation upon which castles stood. Back in the village, the season of rain began. The fields that had once glowed gold were now empty and flooded again. Docks floated between the stubble, and the farmers spent their days mending dikes, repairing baskets, and carving new tools. The rhythm of life slowed, but it never stopped. In the quiet nights, the elder sat by his doorway, listening to the wind moving through the reeds. He knew the harvest they had given away would feed others, perhaps even strangers far beyond the mountains. Yet, he also knew that in the granaries behind his home, enough remained for his people to endure the winter. Sometimes he thought of how fragile it all was, how a single bad flood or swarm of pests could destroy everything. Yet still, they planted, harvested, and stored, year after year. That was their faith, not the faith of temples or priests, but the faith of the earth itself, the belief that labor and patience would yield life again. One evening, as the last of the traders departed, the elder's granddaughter asked him why they worked so hard just to give so much away. The old man smiled faintly and said, "Because the grain must travel farther than we do. It carries our name, our hands, our prayers. When the rice leaves our fields, it takes a piece of us, and in return, the earth remembers." He looked out at the flooded paddies, the moonlight glinting on the water's surface. In that reflection, the world seemed both endless and small, bound together by the same fragile threads of hunger, hope, and harvest. And so the season turned once more. The granaries stood silent under the stars, guarding the rice like sacred treasure. Somewhere, far away, in castles and kitchens, people would taste the grain and never know the story of the hands that grew it. But the villagers would remember. Every stalk they planted was a promise that even in the hardest times, they would endure, one harvest at a time. Dawn broke over the distant city like molten gold spilling across stone rooftops. Unlike the quiet village nestled among paddies and rivers, the city was alive with movement and noise. Wagons clattered along cobblestone streets, merchants shouted their wares, and the clanging of smiths' hammers echoed from alleys where iron was forged into tools, locks, and weapons. Here, the rice from the valley would find its way into a complex web of commerce, a world far removed from the quiet rhythm of the fields. At the city gates, guards in leather and chainmail inspected incoming caravans. They noted the Lord's seal on the sacks of rice, their eyes sharp for counterfeit marks or improper measurements. The oxen trudged in carefully, the carts creaking under the weight of golden grain. The city was a maze of stone and timber, narrow streets twisting unpredictably. But the wagons moved with practiced precision, guided by men who knew every pothole and turn. The rice was unloaded into a large courtyard, where a team of laborers worked in organized chaos. Each sack was carefully stacked onto pallets, tall towers of beige and gold, separated by narrow walkways for inspection and counting. The steward of the city granary, a stout man with ink-stained fingers, checked the seals against his ledger. He tapped each sack with a rod to listen to the sound of settling grain, a skill he had honed over decades. Any hollow echo could indicate spoilage or theft, and no error was tolerated. Nearby, clerks recorded the weight and origin of each shipment. Their quills scratched rapidly across parchment, a river of ink documenting the lifeblood of the city. Some of the rice would be sold to markets, some reserved for royal kitchens, and some stored for times of scarcity or famine. In these walls, rice was more than food. It was currency, leverage, and insurance. In the marketplace, the city was a cacophony of smells and sounds. Traders from distant provinces hawked spices, dried meats, fabrics dyed in deep indigo and crimson, and exotic objects brought by sailors from the coasts. The scent of cooked rice mingled with smoke, salt, and the tang of animals. Vendors displayed it in large, open baskets, sometimes toasted to enhance flavor, sometimes polished white and fragrant, ready for immediate sale. A traveling merchant from the southern ports carried a sack of rare saffron, his eyes sharp as he negotiated with local bakers who sought to flavor ceremonial dishes. Another trader displayed tiny clay figurines and jade beads, while children ran between stalls, laughing and bargaining with practiced cunning. The marketplace was not chaotic. It was orchestrated chaos, each participant a note in the grand symphony of commerce. In the royal palace, a different narrative played out. The rice from the valley had arrived under guard, transported in barrels and sacks to the stone cellars beneath the throne. The steward presented the shipment to the head cook, a woman whose hands had prepared hundreds of feasts for lords, nobles, and visiting dignitaries. She examined the grains meticulously, turning them over in her palms, inhaling the faint scent of sun and earth. Only the finest rice would be chosen for the royal kitchens. The rest would feed the soldiers, servants, and the city's poor. The palace itself was a hive of activity. Servants scurried across mosaic floors, carrying baskets of vegetables and dried fish. The clatter of pots and pans mixed with the soft murmur of advisors discussing tax and trade. In this environment, rice was as strategic as gold. A well-timed gift of grain could secure an alliance, feed an army, or calm unrest in distant provinces. Every kernel was accounted for. Waste was considered a crime. Meanwhile, merchants from foreign lands arrived by river barges. Their sails flapped lazily in the wind as they docked at stone quays, bringing with them treasures from overseas, spices, silks, and ceramics. They exchanged the exotic goods for rice, sometimes in bulk, sometimes in small parcels. The transactions were formal, recorded in ledgers, sealed with wax, and witnessed by multiple parties. The rice would travel hundreds of miles, feeding courts, monasteries, and distant armies. At night, the city quieted, but never slept entirely. Watchmen patrolled the walls, and the granaries were locked and guarded. The scent of cooked rice from taverns and homes drifted through narrow alleys. Families gathered around small fires, sharing the evening meal, while traders balanced their ledgers by candlelight. In this sprawling urban world, every grain of rice told a story of toil, transport, taxation, and trade. High above, in the Lord's Tower, the steward looked out over the city. The lights of the market glimmered like stars on earth. He thought of the distant valley where the rice was grown, of hands that had bent in the early sun to cut and bind the stalks. He understood that the lifeblood of the city depended on those simple, relentless acts of labor, repeated year after year. Without them, the markets would fail, the kitchens would grow silent, and the city itself would crumble. The rice had traveled far, from flooded fields to grand stone cellars, from simple village meals to the gilded plates of the palace. And yet, despite its journey, it carried the memory of the valley, the sweat of the farmers, the rhythm of the sickle, the laughter of children, the songs of the elder. Even here, in the bustling, mercantile heart of civilization, the grain whispered of home. And so, as the moon rose over the city and the lights flickered in the towers, the cycle continued. Rice was harvested, stored, transported, sold, and eaten. But beneath all of it, the story of labor, patience, and quiet devotion endured. The world beyond the village might never know the names of those who grew it, but every kernel bore their legacy, golden as the dawn over the paddies. Autumn arrived with a chill that seeped into the bones, a reminder that the year's cycle was not always generous. In the valley, the paddies, now bare and reflective with leftover water, shimmered under a gray sky. The village felt the weight of uncertainty. Though the granaries held rice, nature could be cruel, and the memory of bad seasons lingered like a shadow over the land. One morning, the elder walked among the stored sacks, lifting each with care, inspecting the grain for signs of spoilage or moisture. He found a few sacks beginning to sweat, tiny white mold spots forming on the husks. It was a minor problem, easily managed with sun-drying and careful stirring, but it reminded him that even the most meticulous work could be undone by the whims of the weather. Soon, word came from neighboring valleys. A swarm of locusts had descended upon distant paddies, consuming crops with frightening speed. The villagers watched the horizon with apprehension, knowing that a pest invasion of that scale could reach the necks. Preparations began immediately. The elders called a council, gathering men, women, and even older children. They discussed strategies to protect stored grain, layering it with ash to repel insects, keeping watch at night, and building simple traps to capture rodents. The work was relentless. Families took shifts, guarding the granaries in the cold nights, torches flickering against the mud walls. The children, usually carefree, now stood vigil beside their parents, learning the seriousness of preservation. Every movement was deliberate, each bag repositioned, each stalk monitored, every opening of a sack recorded in ink. Meanwhile, in the fields, the last remnants of the harvest were checked. Any stray grains left behind could attract pests, so they were gathered carefully, swept into small mats, and stored in temporary baskets. Women worked tirelessly, their hands raw from constant handling, their backs bent like the stalks they once cut, the rhythm of labor that had defined their lives. Through the harvest now continued in defense against decay and consumption. Despite these precautions, famine loomed in the collective memory. The elder recalled seasons decades prior, when floods had washed away the seedlings, or drought had turned paddies into cracked clay. The stories were passed down to the young ones not as tales of fear, but as lessons in resilience. The rice remembers us. If we remember it, he would say, treat it with care, and it will see you through the hardest winters. Beyond the village, the Lord's steward received news of the pest invasions as well. Couriers arrived on horseback, bringing reports of lost crops from distant estates. The royal granaries were scrutinized, and measures were taken to redistribute rice to regions at risk of famine. The political machinery of survival churned, a stark contrast to the quiet, human toil of the farmers who had grown the grain in the first place. The villagers were not idle observers. They took matters into their own hands, devising simple but effective solutions. Clay pots were filled with ash and placed between the sacks to deter insects. Salted straw was scattered in corners to repel mice. Families took turns sprinkling rice with a thin layer of powdered lime to prevent fungal growth. It was exhausting work, yet essential. Survival depended on vigilance. Evenings became times of reflection and storytelling. Round fires, children listened to elders recount how the village had survived previous calamities. Blighted crops, disease, harsh winters. These stories were filled with practical advice. How to store grain, how to rotate sacks to prevent spoilage, how to recognize the subtle signs of infestation before it became disastrous. The tales were as much lessons in agriculture as they were in endurance. One particularly harsh night, rain fell in sheets, drumming on the roofs of the granaries. Water seeped into the earthen walls, threatening to ruin the carefully stored rice. The villagers worked through the night, piling mats and straw around the base of the granaries, shoveling mud to reinforce walls, and moving the most vulnerable sacks to higher ground. Exhaustion was absolute, yet a quiet determination burned in every eye. The survival of the village depended not on luck alone, but on diligence, knowledge, and unity. By dawn, the storm had passed. Mud-streaked and soaked, the villagers inspected the grain. Miraculously, the preparations had worked. Only a few sacks had minor damage, easily repaired by sun-drying. Relief swept through the settlement, though tempered by the knowledge that challenges were never truly over. The cycle of work, protection, and vigilance would continue until the next planting season. The elder stood silently, watching the villagers resume their tasks. He understood that survival was a lesson written in repetition. Sow, harvest, guard, store, and defend. Every grain of rice was a testament to human effort, patience, and foresight. It was more than sustenance. It was memory and promise, connecting the hands that planted it to the generations who would reap its rewards. And as the sun rose over the valley, glinting on wet fields and mud-streaked granaries, he whispered a quiet prayer, not to kings or distant gods, but to the earth itself, the silent keeper of life and death. For in the medieval world, survival was never certain. It was earned, day by day, grain by grain, hand by hand. Winter arrived quietly, yet with a weight that pressed down on the village. The valley was hushed under a thin layer of frost. The paddies now mirrors of frozen silver reflecting the pale winter sun. Smoke curled from chimneys and hearths, winding into the cold air like serpents of warmth. Life slowed, but it did not stop. Winter was a time of reflection, mending, and preparation, the village's final stage of the harvest cycle. Before the planting season would begin again, inside the main granary, the stored rice lay in silence, stacked carefully in earthen bins. The elder walked among the sacks, tapping and sniffing each one to ensure that no pest had found its way in. He ran his hands over the husks, feeling the weight of each bag, knowing that this grain would sustain families for months to come. Round him, other villagers repaired tools, patched baskets, and sharpened sickles, preparing for the spring planting. Every act, no matter how small, was part of the eternal rhythm: sow, nurture, harvest, store, survive, repeat. Children gathered inside the communal hall, sitting cross-legged near the fire. The elder's voice filled the room as he recounted stories of past winters, harsh storms, frozen rivers, the arrival of snow that blanketed the valley for weeks. Each story carried lessons. One tale told of a season when floods had destroyed a quarter of the rice harvest, and the village had survived only because of the meticulous way they had stored and rotated the grain. Another recounted how a sudden pest infestation had been managed with quick thinking and coordinated effort. These stories were more than entertainment. They were manuals of survival, passed from generation to generation. Outside, villagers labored in smaller groups, carrying firewood, repairing fences, and tending to animals. Livestock were brought closer to shelters, feed rationed carefully, and every effort made to ensure no one went hungry. Women spun thread from flax, weaving cloth and repairing clothing that had worn thin over months of toil. Their hands moved with quiet efficiency, turning the cycles of nature into the cycles of life. Despite the cold, a sense of community warmth persisted. Neighbors helped one another, carrying grain from storage to kitchen or lending tools for repairs. A shared meal in the long hall brought everyone together. Rice porridge, flavored with dried herbs and small pieces of salted meat, filled bellies and provided comfort against the biting cold. Conversation was low, reflective. Talk of the coming planting season, of what tools would be needed, which paddies required repair. The future, though uncertain, was approached with pragmatism and care. On the longest night of the year, the villagers held a quiet ritual at the riverbank. Fires were lit along the frozen water, and simple offerings were made to the river and the earth. A handful of rice was cast into the current. Prayers whispered for a fruitful spring and protection against famine or pestilence. The elder recited the ancient words his father had taught him, words passed down for generations, invoking both gratitude and hope. Children mimicked the actions, scattering rice and bowing their heads, learning that sustenance was sacred and the land a living entity deserving respect. Inside their homes, families huddled close. The rice from the granary had been carefully measured, each portion allocated to last until new planting. Every meal was deliberate. There was no waste, only appreciation for what had been earned. Stories of distant cities and trade routes reached the children through travelers and wandering merchants, but they returned to the fire and to the rice, their most tangible connection to life and survival. The elder often wandered the village at night, torch in hand, inspecting the granaries, checking on families, observing the quiet rhythm of winter. Snow dusted the rooftops, and the river had begun to freeze, but the life of the valley pulsed beneath the cold. He reflected on the labor of the year, from planting to harvest, from guarding against pests to trading in distant towns. Every grain told a story of toil, endurance, and continuity. He understood that the cycle of seasons was a teacher. Winter was the pause, the time to gather wisdom, repair tools, and prepare for the renewal that spring would bring. Every year the cycle repeated, yet no year was identical. Nature's unpredictability demanded attentiveness, and the villagers' survival depended on their constant care and vigilance. As the night deepened and the valley lay in quiet, the granary stood sentinel-like, filled with golden rice that carried the memory of the village. Fires flickered in the homes, and the elder, watching from the doorway, whispered once more a prayer of thanks, not for abundance alone, but for perseverance, community, and the unbroken chain of life. The rhythm of the valley was eternal. Sow, nurture, harvest, store, defend, and prepare. Rice was more than sustenance. It was the heart of their existence, connecting the present to the past and the promise of the future. Spring returned quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. The frost melted from the paddies, leaving behind shallow pools of water that reflected the pale blue of the sky. The valley stirred with renewed life. Birds returned from distant forests. Frogs began their chorus in the flooded fields, and the villagers emerged from their winter seclusion, ready to continue the eternal cycle of cultivation. The elder walked along the edges of the paddies, inspecting the soil. His hands, lined with decades of work, pressed into the wet earth, testing its readiness. The water must rise just enough to cradle the seedlings, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Around him, younger men and women prepared the fields. Dikes were repaired, channels cleared, and the earth smoothed to hold the precious water that would nurture the rice. The planting began at dawn. Families worked in pairs and trios, moving in deliberate rows across the shallow water. Tiny seedlings, bundled neatly over winter, were carefully separated and planted by hand. Each seedling was pressed gently into the mud, the fingers guiding it upright as if nurturing a fragile life. Children followed, carrying small baskets of seedlings and water, learning the rhythm of planting by watching their elders. The process was slow and methodical. Every row had to be straight, every seedling spaced with care. Too close, and the plants would choke each other. Too far apart, and the soil would be wasted. Conversation was minimal, broken only by the soft murmur of coordination. Occasionally, a song rose, low and rhythmic, helping to guide the repetitive motion of planting and creating a harmony between human labor and the quiet. Watching Earth, the elder paused at the far edge of the largest field, watching a young girl carefully plant each seedling. Her hands were small but steady, and she hummed a tune he remembered from his own childhood. A smile touched his lips. It was in these moments, the careful attention to detail, the silent teaching of patience, that the village preserved not only its crops, but its culture. By midday, the sun reflected harshly on the water. Workers paused under simple canopies of reed mats, sharing rice cakes and tea from small clay cups. Even during these brief rests, the conversation never strayed from the fields. Which paddies needed more water, which seedlings had been damaged by frost, how to protect against the first signs of pests. Knowledge of the land and its cycles was passed quietly, often without words, through demonstration and careful observation. As the planting continued over the days and weeks, The valley transformed. Shimmering rows of young green shoots rose from the water, a promise of growth and sustenance. Ducks were released into the paddies, helping to control insects and stir the water, their quacks punctuating the soft rhythm of human toil. The elder observed it all, silently noting the coordination required, how labor, knowledge, and patience came together to secure life for another season. At the edge of the village, traders from nearby towns arrived with tools, fertilizer, and woven baskets. The exchange was simple, but essential. A bag of clay-coated seeds could secure the next harvest. A bundle of reed mats might protect drying rice from rain. Even in this early spring, the villagers understood that their survival depended on both their labor and careful management of external resources. By evening, the fields lay bathed in golden light, rows of seedlings glistening like a miniature forest rising from the water. The villagers returned to their homes, soaked and exhausted, yet satisfied. Fires burned, food was shared, and families gathered to rest. The elder walked slowly among them, noting the continuity of life, the passing of knowledge, and the promise of the rice to come. As night fell, the valley was quiet but alive. The planted paddies reflected the stars, tiny green specks reaching upward through the water. The rhythm of planting, watching, and tending would continue day by day until the first harvest. Rice, as always, remained the center of their existence, a silent witness to their labor, their devotion, and their enduring connection to the land. And so the cycle turned once more. Seedlings became stalks, stalks became grain, grain became sustenance. And the people of the valley, through tireless labor and care, ensured that life, fragile yet persistent, would continue. Summer ripened slowly over the valley, bringing warmth, long days, and the golden promise of harvest. The rice paddies, once delicate green shoots, had grown tall and strong, their stems bowing under the weight of swelling grains. The village hummed with a quiet tension. The culmination of months of labor, vigilance, and care was nearly complete. Every villager knew that the season's success depended on unity and precision. By dawn, the fields were alive with activity. Men, women, and older children moved in coordinated rows, sickles in hand, cutting the stalks with practiced rhythm. The sun glinted off metal edges, and the gentle clatter of tied bundles being laid down echoed across the valley. Even the youngest children were present, carrying small baskets to hold stray grains or fetch water for those working under the fierce sun. The elder observed from the edge of the largest field, his eyes following each movement. He remembered every harvest of his life, the toil, the festivals, the storms, the pests, and he understood the magnitude of this moment. The rice they were gathering would sustain them through the next winter, pay taxes to the Lord, and secure trade in distant markets. Every stalk held the weight of survival, memory, and tradition. Bundles were tied quickly and methodically, then stacked in neat rows along the dikes to dry. The threshing process began immediately. Women and men used wooden planks and flails to separate grain from husk, their motions synchronized in a rhythm learned over generations. The sound of pounding echoed across the valley, a percussion that spoke of endurance, diligence, and hope. Children watched, learning the art of careful handling, the patience required to ensure that not a single grain was wasted. By midday, the sun hung high, relentless and unforgiving. Workers paused under canopies of reeds, sharing small meals of boiled rice, herbs, and dried vegetables. Conversation was minimal, words were saved for coordination, guidance, and the occasional warning. The air was full of shared understanding. Every movement, every gesture was part of the collective effort to secure life itself. When the last of the bundles were harvested, the villagers turned their attention to storage. Sacks of rice were carried to granaries, weighed and carefully sealed. Ash, straw, and lime were layered to prevent pests, and the elders supervised every step. Each bin was marked, each portion accounted for. Families placed small symbols on boards beside their shares, preserving the memory of contribution and ensuring accountability. The granaries, standing tall and silent, now held the fruits of an entire season's labor. That evening, the village gathered for the harvest festival, a tradition as old as the valley itself. Fires burned brightly along the riverbank, the reflection of flames dancing across the water. Drums were beaten and long songs were sung, melodies that recounted floods, pestilence, frost, and famine, but also resilience, skill, and unity. Dancers moved barefoot on the earth, their motions precise, echoing the rhythm of planting, tending, and harvesting. The elder, seated near the fire, watched as young and old alike celebrated the culmination of their toil. Children laughed, their faces smeared with ash from the fire. Women served rice-based dishes, flavored with herbs and small portions of dried fish. Men toasted with watered wine, honoring the earth, the crops, and each other. There was exhaustion in every face, but also pride, the hard-won knowledge that they had succeeded together, even in the quiet of the night. As the festival dwindled and families returned to their homes, the valley was alive with subtle sounds. The rustling of drying rice in the granaries, the distant cry of an owl, the gentle movement of the river. The elder walked slowly, inspecting the fields and the stored grain one last time, feeling the weight of the season and sensing the continuity of life. He reflected on the cycle they had completed: planting, nurturing, harvesting, storing, guarding, and celebrating. Every grain was a testament to patience, labor, and communal effort. The valley, the people, and the rice were bound together in a delicate, unbroken chain. The villagers' survival was not guaranteed, but it was earned. Year after year, season after season, as the first light of dawn touched the granaries once more. The elder whispered quietly, not for the harvest alone, but for perseverance, tradition, and the enduring spirit of the valley. The rice, golden and secure, carried the memory of every hand that had worked it, every foot that had walked the flooded paddies, every song and prayer uttered during the long months of labor. In that silence, the valley itself seemed to breathe, a living testament to the rhythm of life, the passage of time, and the quiet, unyielding devotion of the people. The cycle would turn again, but for now, the harvest was complete, and the village slept under the protective watch of the granaries, the stars, and the elder's steady gaze. The story ended not with a flourish, but with the quiet, enduring truth of life sustained, tradition preserved, and the land honored, a story written grain by grain, season by season. In the valley where the rice never forgot the hands that grew it,